There is an awareness, I'd say a renewed awareness, or maybe an awareness in a new guise throughout the West, that the impact of colonization of the former 2 centuries, where Britain, France, Portugal roamed the world and took over countries and stole their riches, essentially enslaved their people, that despite the fact that it doesn't exist, colonization doesn't exist in its former obscene self, but it exists still and it persists in mental educational systems, in modes of thinking. If you go to the former colonies, I'll mention my own country where I herald from, Iraq, for instance, still the impact of the British is almost, I would say, indelible. It's there. It's everywhere you look. It's in the modes of thinking. It's in how systems work. It's in how policies are made and how states are run. The impact is there, how the economy is built. And more importantly, and this is what's happening and the kind of discussions that are taking place now more and more frequently, is that sources of information and knowledge that educate the new generations of graduates in various fields, particularly in humanities, they are built on these remnants of colony. For instance, the fact that students studying in humanities degrees, their first few months are spent reading for Western philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, and the like, with the absolute elimination of any other, as though the Chinese never had a civilization or never had knowledge, as though the Indians never had knowledge, as though the Arabs and the Muslims never had a civilization and knowledge. And this is incredibly important because those young students will graduate to become future leaders of industry, of politics, of states, and the like. So the first thing that I thought about when I arrived here in Malaysia is whether there is an image of this, whether this is mirrored somehow in Malaysia, or how is this seen? I mean, obviously we're talking here about a different region, we're talking about a different experience, about different history, but how is this seen within the context of Malaysia and Southeast Asia generally?
Okay, who shall start? First, thank you, Dr. Anas, for having me here. Well, talking about a very interesting topic, decolonization of knowledge, is actually a kind of open-ended topic. But let me start with a little sharing. I was teaching economic history back on the campus. And we had a textbook, quite kind of standard textbooks. And the chapters were all well written, starting from mercantilism and so on. But apparently, there was no single chapter or section dedicated on the history of Islamic economics.
This is in Malaysia?
Yeah, in Malaysia. Way back years ago when I was still active teaching on campus at the University of Kebangsaan Malaysia, National University of Malaysia. So I thought, well, this is not complete. Yeah, for the sake of history, it's okay to go through the various evolution of trade, various interlinkages across countries at the time in the middle century. But I think it wasn't fair to exclude entirely trade relations between the Islamic world and Eastern, global East and throughout the globe at the time. And at the time, the Ottoman Empire was kind of the center of trade. Yeah. So it wasn't fair to the student to exclude that part of economic history. So I included that.
Very good.
From my own research, from my own observation. So I put up a chapter on Islamic history, especially that relates to trade and the economy in general. So there was one of, a small effort on my part to really introduce to the students, a better picture, a more comprehensive picture of the history of economic thoughts, not excluding how Islam views economy.
What kind of impact does that have? In addition to, of course, I understand that people will learn about a chapter or a phase of history that wasn't there before. But what kind of impact does it have on the kind of character that then graduates with that, with that degree, but also that collection of knowledge of this? What kind of, what I'm trying to arrive at is how important is this?
I think as someone in academia, someone in academic, or rather being a professor, it is our duty to impart, the kind of knowledge as much as comprehensive as you can, so that the student will get the right picture. The student will get the right understanding of what actually evolved. So the knowledge shouldn't be, Western-centric or Eastern-centric, but it should be complete, so that students particularly, would have the right thoughts, right understanding, right imagination of what actually happened in the context of economic history when I was teaching the course. But there was actually a very micro aspect of decolonization of knowledge. Beyond that, we can see things happening in a much bigger way, particularly in the domain of policies. But we don't really link that to the so-called decolonization of knowledge.
Right. Yes.
It is all about discovery, soul searching. It's about looking for or seeking or searching for the right mechanism, right tool on how to address the issues at hand. We may think that, this model, this concepts, this theory may not suit our realities. From there, we do the search, we do the research, we do, the discovery processes. And apparently, we found that much of the mechanism, much of the theoretical construct, much of the philosophies are already there. But we need to do a search, a deep search. We need to dig around the literature and understand how those philosophies, which have long been forgotten, have anything to do with realities. Take, for example, Islamic banking. This is a big departure from conventional banking. I must say, although it doesn't really meet what the Sharia really wanted, but it offers something different. It's not a solution yet, but it is something very radical. It's a radical change from the conventional banking system. And this is one example where in the micro aspect, country-wise, Malaysia has been quite successful to radically depart from conventional banking, though we still maintain the conventional banks, but we have alongside that the so-called Sharia-based banking or the Islamic finance or Islamic banking system under the jurisdiction of Bank Negara Malaysia, our national bank.
This is quite important, and I'll give you an example of how and why from our experiences. One of the, I would always describe, and this is contested often in the media, I often describe one of the biggest lies that Western and particularly European leaders and thinkers often repeat. They always say that Europe is built on Judeo-Christian heritage. And I often call this one of the biggest lies that is ever told. Because when it comes to Judaism, Europe was one of its biggest enemies. And no one persecuted the Jews more than the Europeans. And no one created the Holocaust but the Europeans, and the pogroms but the Europeans. And also to admit the impact of Islam over 6 centuries or 5 centuries of Andalusia civilization, which until today, tens of millions of people from around the world flock to visit in Cordoba, in Granada, in Toledo, in Seville, and the like, is in my view, it's a crime. And one of the impacts this is having on graduates of people who never know that Muslims had any contribution towards, our mathematics, our algebra, our, the various theories of that we all know and we all studied. When it comes to international relations, they don't care much about, Muslims, for instance. Why? Because they had nothing. They contributed nothing to the world. That's what is in their collective education mentality. That's how they were formed as personalities. That's why it's so important to, as you put it, why is it that in a country such as Malaysia, studying an area as crucial as this, why is there not a chapter, at least, on one of the most important spheres of history in terms when it comes to international trade and the like? So, I'm interested to hear about your own perspective on this.
Yeah, I just comment on that you were saying about the Europeans, particularly British.
Yes.
Their perception of the world is, what we call Eurocentric, basically, because that's how they have been trained. I remember, actually, I began to realize this only just about, in a bit more serious way. About 2 years ago, I traveled to India and I found a book. That book was written by Frank Copan. It's a British historian at Oxford. 600 pages. It's called The Silk Road.
Yes.
New History of the World or something like that.
Yes.
I forgot the actual name. But he, in the introduction, the preface, he mentioned why he wrote that book. And he said that so far I've been exposed to basically the Western civilization is the best, is based on the Roman Greek civilization and so on. So it started from there. But he was never exposed to other civilizations until he began to, when he come into his field, started to look into all the manuscripts and so on. Then he began to see that history of the world is different from what they've been taught before. That Roman and Greek is not the center of civilization. It's not the originator of everything. There are so many things to the east. In China, in India, and in Islamic civilization, there are so many things that actually is much better, bigger, and much more flourishing. Even
much more influential.
Flourishing, very. The well-being of the people there will be much better and so on compared to the Western world. Even at the time of the Dark Ages in Europe, the East
was flourishing.
Yeah, flourishing.
Yeah.
So, but that has never been exposed. So that's the reason why he wrote that book, and he said it's a new history of the world. I think at least that kind of realization, I think, is something that we hope many more people in the West will realize about that. So coming back to this part of the world, I think if we come to the history of education, before the coming of the Portuguese came in 1511. At that time, we have all the basically it'll be the Muslim Sultanate of Malacca, Pasai, Aceh, all this region are all Islamic. Before that was Hindu and Buddhism, and after that will be the Islam. So during that Islamic empire, there are teachings, Islamic teaching. It's not really properly system. It's an education system, but there are all these teaching through teachers, the religious teachers and so on. Yeah. Then the Portuguese came 1511, and then the Dutch 1640. I think.
Yeah, 1640.
1640, And then the British came in 1786 and 1874. At about around that time, the actual colonization started in 1874 after the Bangkok Treaty. So then the British start to introduce their education and start to change. So if we see that development, the development up to the post-World War II, then we can see the British, we call it English schools, actually predominates in Malaysia. There are some Malay schools, some Chinese schools, some Tamil Indian schools, but mainly it will be English speaking, English tradition, English culture in most of the schools. Then in about 1950s, there was a move to turn. We have independence in 1957.
Yes.
Then at that point we have the constitution. In the constitution, I think Prof. Jamal can speak more about how our constitution was being developed. Initially it was all English schools, but by the 70s, there realization in our political establishment that we need to come back to our own tradition. So that's why we come back to Malay as the main language delivery. And by 1980s, at that time, our present Prime Minister was actually the Education Minister of Education. He started to introduce international Islamic universities, and also more Islamic curriculum introduced in the universities, even not in the other universities as well. So I think the development, we are beginning to realize that, partly because of the influence of the Islamic consciousness or awareness.
Was it religious or nationalistic?
Initially, it was nationalistic. That's coming back to Malay.
Okay.
Malay language as the main language instruction. In fact, in the university, the national university, the main language instruction in the university even.
It's nativism.
Right.
Yes. So it's a Malay. But when the Islamic consciousness begin to come here around the end of 70s, 1980s, then that Islamization word is coming. So we slowly
and does this? I mean, the universities that were constructed in the 70s and 80s are now world renowned. I mean, people flock from all over the world in order to come to the International Islamic University and others.
Yeah.
The question is, this educational ethos, does it run through from early education years, or is it merely on a higher education level? Meaning, is the character building something that starts from as early as possible in primary care, for instance, or is it something that begins at a much later stage?
That's kind of difficult to actually pinpoint the exact point in time where those things started. But clearly at the university level, there were, very high awareness among educators to actually find ways to incorporate the so-called indigenous epistemology in the various subjects, particularly in subjects like education as well, history, civilization, ethics. So we tried as much as we could to incorporate what we could gather from what we may consider as indigenous epistemology. And it's really not really trying to, to dismantle colonial knowledge, but we thought that there are other types of epistemology which are equally important, which equally contribute towards well-being of society in general at large. So it's not about dismantling colonial knowledge per se, just like that. It's again about integrating the various epistemology. So that's happening, and I can observe also at the school level certain courses, particularly arts, humanities, like history course. There are attempts to incorporate the new historiography, the history about history from our own perspective. So again, this is not about dismantling just like that colonial knowledge. It's about imparting the right thing. What we thought has been somewhat disregarded or somewhat underestimated due to certain obvious reasons at the time during colonial times. But now we have the realization we are equal in terms of the capacity to acquire knowledge, capacity to do R&D. If you look at academicians around the world or academia in general around the world, they are of equal footing. We publish in Q1 journal, for example, just like any academia around the world. So we have the same access, same capability. So why can't we have the same realization that actually the so-called mainstream knowledge in various aspects, particularly humanities, they are actually not complete and therefore need to be complemented by other epistemology, particularly indigenous epistemology. So that is happening in Malaysia. But apparently, the one which is most active in decolonizing the so-called colonial knowledge is coming from the arts, humanities discipline, particularly history.
Correct.
But I noticed, if I can say this, I noticed that with all our sincerity, with all our eagerness to espouse the so-called indigenous epistemology, it may create a different kind of impact, a different kind of inequity, a different kind of inequality for some reason. This is because Malaysia is unique. That we did not exist just like that. It was a deliberate process to create Malaysia. And we know the kinds of thoughts, the kinds of philosophy that underlie our constitution.
Yeah.
So we are creating something new.
Right.
New in the context
Tell me a little bit about this. This is very interesting, very, very fascinating. Firstly, at what point of history did Malaysia begin? When was it born? If I was to ask about the date of birth of Malaysia, when would it be?
Well, within Malaysia, within the nation state called Malaysia, there have been some elements which already existed long before we gained independence. Perhaps as early as 1920s, or in fact earlier than that, the concept of Malay land reserve was already formulated by our colonial master.
Yes.
Who were the Malays that had the right to have access to land, for example? It was already formulated long before independence. And the same attribute, the same thoughts prevailed. And it became a key feature in our constitution. Who are the Malays? I think it's very obvious that the definition of Malays in Malaysia, one of the characteristics is they must be Muslim.
Okay.
But you know that Malays, they also exist elsewhere within Southeast Asia, particularly within what we call as Nusantara, which includes Indonesia, Brunei, South Thailand. So they have different thoughts of Malays, different thinking, different views. And this asymmetry in terms of how we view Malays in Malaysia and in other countries would lead to, a kind of difficulties, kind of challenge on how to reconcile the various issues affecting
It's quite
Malaysia.
Fascinating because, again, from what you've been saying, what both of you have been saying, when we talk about, the initial question that I brought was about the decolonization of knowledge, but now we're talking about something far deeper and far more impactful and probably even meaningful.
The point here, sorry to interject.
Yes.
The point is, when you talk about decolonization in the context of the new emerging nation states, even since the post-Second World War, we need to be constrained. We need to bear in mind that we need to be constrained by the provisions of the respective constitutions. In Indonesia, they have Undang-Undang Dasar or Pancasila. Malaysia, we have our Perlembagaan or Constitution, which defines very clearly many aspects of what constitute as the social fabric of these various nation states. So this needs to be a constraint. So it poses a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties when we try, even though how sincere we are, how serious we are in terms of digging the corpus of indigenous wisdom or local wisdom and so on, we still need to be constrained by the new dimension enshrined by our constitution. So this is one of the difficulties.
I'll add to this about the issues about constitution and so on. If we see one of from even our side, sometimes we are stereotyping, saying that the colonizers left brown-skinned British.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I would agree that happened in Malaysia to a certain extent until Islamization came. So before the Islamic awareness came, we see people who are trained in the West, in London particularly, in England, they come back and they become brown-skinned British, basically, the Anglophiles. So they live their way of life like the English. They wear ties, they have that way of life.
Dogs and
and they play golf, polo, and so on. So they become especially these people, they became the ruling class, the aristocrats, and the politicians. So, within the 60s, we can see many of these. But later, I think partly because of the peculiar nature of our constitution, I think it is really unique. Our constitution is really unique. You have such thing as saying not only Islam as the official language, but you have things saying that Malay has certain rights. Bahasa, the language has certain privilege, certain right and privileges. And there's so many things that is so specific, giving a point. For example, like definition of Malay, he must be Muslim. If you are Malay but not Muslim, you are not a Malay. You Malay by race, ethnic, but you are not a Muslim. It's not considered as a Malay under the constitution. So this is something very unique.
Does this create tensions in a multicultural,
No.
diverse?
It has created a new equilibrium, and somehow we readily accept it. We already think that it is part of us. So this is what we call as this colonial knowledge or colonial thoughts have been embedded in our society. And whether or not we want to dismantle it, I think there's a different dimension. We don't think so.
But partly because of the way during the independence, there was a pact or an agreement between the various communities, because the Malay says that they are the original people here. So the two main groups of communities who came a bit later, these are called the immigrants. We can accept them as the citizens of the new country that's going to be independent, provided they recognize those special rights and privileges of the Malays. Even it's mentioned that like for example, they can practice their religion, but they cannot preach to the Malays. I think that's also something I think no other constitution in the world have this kind of provision. So very specific. So but then it is very much nationalistic, but the nationalistic is defined partly by religion.
And it's fascinating because both of you are pressing on a point which is absolutely obvious and true, but it's not alluded to or mentioned as much as probably it should be, and that is the importance of where we depart historically, and the kind of variances and differences and disparities even. You know, when I speak as a Brit, for instance, because of the legacy of Britain, and because history, according to Britain, was written by the conquerors, those who overwhelmed others, and therefore, for instance, the history of the Middle East is written essentially by Europeans, by Orientalists who came from either Britain or France or Western Europe or the like. So whilst in Malaysia, there was a totally different and probably unique kind of setup and starting point that created its own premise for history. And that's I find quite interesting. And as well, it leads me to ask about how does that impact current generations? How does the Malaysian youth, how does it connect with its history, with its own
I mentioned a
identity?
bit about history, the history curriculum currently. During our days when we were, I think, 1960s, maybe you were in the 1970s, secondary schools, we learned all about those foreign, the British, even the Roman,
Julius Caesar, even.
Julius Caesar, all in the curriculum. Now, no more.
Wow.
So since, in fact, when we...
was that deliberate?
Yes.
Deliberate. It was by design.
By design. Because in the latest curriculum, KSSM, the standard curriculum for secondary schools, for the 5 years of the secondary schools, the first 3 years are only allocated for the others.
Yes.
And the fourth year and the fifth year are all about us. So, in fact, the third year is already us and them, and then all about us. That means they have to understand really what happened here, the constitution, everything about us in the history subject for the secondary school. So I think that transformation from what we have been learning. In fact, we learned last time about Indus civilization, all the others.
Mohenjo-daro.
Mohenjo-daro,
I still remember that.
We still remember all those other civilizations, but less about us. But so now the curriculum is very much about us. We look more inwards.
So coming back to my question, young Malaysians, how do they, are they comfortable in their own skin? Is Malaysian identity...
I like this question, actually.
Is it clear to them exactly what it is?
Something that we don't really discuss much, somehow. But I will try to relate your question with the one I mentioned about so-called nativism, which is very prominent, quite profound in terms of decolonization of colonial knowledge. Somehow, this motive of nativism or perhaps ethnic-based nationalism is somehow very outstanding. Rather than calling, the Malaysian to look into Malaysians in the context of Malaysia as a new nation state, where not only the Malays are the citizens of Malaysia, right? So the concept of nation state, the concept of Malaysia as a race, somehow, is not being projected adequately. So it's more towards, as I say, it's more towards nativism, more towards ethnic-based nationalism. Although we call it we still call it, or we may categorize that as under decolonization or efforts done by so-called decolonizers or scholars, decolonizers scholars tend to move towards that, tend to advocate nativism or ethnic-based nationalism, which is something to me not productive. So it's creating a kind of a new inequity, a kind of new, I would say, it's no more equal in terms of how we should treat this locally based or indigenous epistemology. Because we already have this Malaysia as a nation state with the new dimensions as enshrined by our constitution. So this is really a difficulty and a big challenge to us in the context of decolonization of colonial knowledge. As far as history is concerned, as far as humanity is concerned.
It's also fascinating in terms of Malaysia's positioning on the regional as well as global map. In terms of how Malays or citizens of Malaysia, let's open it up a little bit, see themselves and their role and position within the world today. Because, I have to say that from where I sit in London, I can testify to a war of identities. There is this question about who are we, about what it means to be British, what it means to be Canadian, what it means to be French, what it means to be. This question is being asked incessantly. The other, who is a migrant, is seen as a threat, not as someone who's downtrodden, someone who had to leave their home and family and land and come to a foreign land to speak a different language, to treat, to deal in a context that he or she are totally foreign to, but they are a threat. You see, and all of this stems from this crisis of identity. I think it's an identity crisis. So coming back to Malaysia, how does Malaysia see itself on this? Within this arena of conflicting identities, of conflicting national interests, how do they see themselves? Are Malaysians generally, are they isolationists?
I think if you remove the toxic politicians, I'm sorry. Most Malaysians feel they are okay. I think we can live happily.
Are you open to the world?
Yeah, I mean in the sense that in terms of amongst ourselves, this group, the Chinese, the Malays, the Indians, we can happily live without any issues, because that's what we have been doing from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because there was already a pact among the leaders at that time, just so clearly everybody understand these are the limits. We work together, we are all citizens, we do not ask you to go back anymore. Some toxic politician will say, "Why you Chinese should go back to your homeland?" No, we don't say it. Most Malaysians will agree that everybody are citizen equal, except for what has been defined in the constitution. So it's a give and take between the various communities at the time, and that's already okay. And we are together. So, but of course, the issue now is that you become Malaysians and you become nationalistic Malaysians. Sometimes you have problem with Indonesia. Indonesia. So you become very nationalistic in the sense that little bit of spark you may want to about the case of maybe football.
Yes.
Yes. So you become very strong, euphoric about being Malaysian.
But generally speaking, would you describe Malaysian society as being close to outsiders, as being isolationist?
No.
Can I even ask a more difficult question? And please do challenge me if I'm wrong. Is there a sense of xenophobia within Malaysia and Malay communities particularly? Is there that sense that others are of a lesser sort of standard, of a lesser deserving of rights, of freedoms, of whatever? Is there that kind of tension?
There are some portions, some section of the communities that have that, but it's not generally. I think the general view is not that.
And to be perfectly honest, I think that quite a clear indication of what you're saying is Malaysia's relationship with its Muslim kins, around whether the Arab world or around the world generally, that it sees that kind of affiliation, which shows a sense of openness, a sense of contentment with where they stand. And particularly when it comes to the issue of Palestine, for instance, I think that Malaysia,
I think the brotherhood amongst the politicians, the top leadership, down to the grassroots, we have strong affiliation with all the Muslim countries. There's no issue about that.
I think this is part of the implications or the ramifications of the fact that Malaysia has been very open ever since independence. For example, in the 90s, when the fourth Prime Minister was helming the country, Tun Mahathir, he was advocating the Look East policy. He was advocating the so-called East Asian Economic Caucus, encompassing China, Korea, and Japan.
Correct.
So we were very open in almost all aspects in foreign policy, including. And the same nowadays, we are advocating a lot of global issues which are yet to be remedied, particularly issues affecting Muslims in Palestine, in Gaza in particular. So it's just a continuation of what we were in the past. We used to be very open, not just in foreign policies, but also in economics, in trade. Our trade value is more than 100% of our GDP since independence until now. So we can be, we can remain closed. We can remain just, doing nothing, silent, because we have to play our part as much as we could. But yet we need to understand, and in fact, we have been aware that as a small player, as a small country, yet very open economy, we need to strike a good balance between the so-called global west and global east. So that there'll be no harm to us.
That's a very difficult balance to strike.
Balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, Malaysia, you would immediately align with the East, generally speaking.
Yeah, it is not easy.
But in terms of...
But we advocate neutrality.
Okay.
We advocate diplomacy, rather than, for example...
But I take it that the relations with China, with Russia, are fairly amicable.
Yes.
I take it.
Yeah, because as a small player in the language of game theory, we do not have any dominant strategy.
Yeah.
We can, try to balance.
You don't have any aspirations to expand and to occupy nearby countries?
We can't. We don't have the resources anyway.
Okay.
So in the language of game theory, what we can is to do the best strategy, which is to play diplomacy.
Okay.
To advocate neutrality, not to take side, particularly when you talk about military kind of coalition. But we are a member of the five defense treaties anyway.
Yes.
But we do advocate very strongly neutrality and diplomacy in our approach in dealing with foreign affairs.
It's it's fascinating because we, as you all know, we live at a time of Trump, and this has thrown everything into a state of chaos. World order is no longer world order. Things
World
aren't
disorder.
It's a world disorder. You're absolutely right, and the challenge of efficacy and morality in public life, in office, in international relations is unfortunately no longer prominent. I always refer to the infamous press conference between President Trump and Zelensky of Ukraine. And for me, my takeaway was that President Trump just basically stated in front of billions of people around the world, asking Zelensky time and again, you don't have any cards.
No cards.
You have no cards. So it doesn't matter if your cause is righteous. It doesn't matter if you are a victim. It doesn't matter if you are holding no cards, then you don't get to say, you don't get to speak. And that is hugely problematic.
That's right.
As well as obviously the balance of international relations in terms of states of the size and prominence of the United States and their responsibility towards lesser states in terms of size and in terms of prominence. I mean, there's a responsibility so that the world can be run. Otherwise, we'll have empires all over again. We'll have people dominating swathes of territories around the world and controlling what people do and how they move and the like. In light of this, it becomes even more fascinating how players prominent within their regions, but on a global scale, probably not so prominent, such as Malaysia, and how they can manage this. And you mentioned the issue of trying to strike a balance between East and West, but also, and I think that there is this, and again, please do disagree with me if you see it fit, that it's not just about playing politics. Once again, our identities and our collective histories, our histories, they form part and parcel of where we stand in the world today. And I feel that what you're telling me about Malaysia itself, about the way it was founded and the way that it developed in terms of creating its own identity, partly by its education, partly by its constitution, partly by the challenges that surround it, how it finds itself. I find that deeply fascinating. So how do you see this? You know, how do you see the future of Malaysia? Well, the kind of challenges that confronts the Malaysian people. You know, where do you see this?
Yeah, interesting question. Well, Malaysia is a member of ASEAN. Now Malaysia is chairing ASEAN.
Tell me about BRICS also.
Yeah, Malaysia is a member of the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, a member of the Five Nation Treaty Defense Treaty. And we have made known to the world, we advocate neutrality, zone of peace. We advocate diplomacy in dealing with foreign affairs. So being a small nation, I think we are kind of harmless. We don't have any dominant strategy. Unlike Trump, maybe he like to think that he has the dominant strategy. You do, I will do what I wanted, regardless of what you do. That's the layman term of dominant strategy.
Do you have enemies? Do you have enemies?
Yes, but he forgets that there is another entity, or maybe several entities.
No, Malaysia. Does it have enemies?
We don't like to think that we have enemies, but I think we are cautious. We are always cautious about any possibilities, and I think we are well ready for that. So, but nevertheless, we will stick to that approach: neutral diplomacy, the soft power. We don't have any hard power either. So I think so far we are doing well, and first and foremost, before we engage the world, we need to settle some domestic issues.
Yeah.
Most importantly is the equity, income distribution, poverty eradication. Well, I must say, in short, it's about the economic being of our people. And we had the so-called, the most radical social engineering policies known as the new economic policy. That was the world's most radical social engineering policy. Launched in the early 70s. It was about restructuring society so that poverty is not associated with any ethnic group.
Right.
It used to be associated with the Malays.
Okay.
And the Malays were very, unhappy. They were resenting. That may also lead to the social chaos, social strife in 1969, the social violence that cost hundreds of lives. And that so-called
that was the
new economic policy.
Worst racial violence in our history. 1969 May. Well, this is May.
That was attributed.
Everybody remember that.
Strongly attributed to the inequality in terms of income distribution, where the Malays were associated with poverty, with rural economy, and the Indians were associated with working in the plantations, and the Chinese with commerce, with commands of the economic resources. And that was one of the main objectives. The other objective is to eradicate poverty at all levels, all races, not just any particular race.
Was this seen as a success? These measures?
Yes, very much. It has been, I must say, a huge success story, a huge classical case that can be shared with the world. Although, well, I must also talk a little bit about the philosophy of that social engineering called new economic policy.
Affirmative.
We can call it that way too, affirmative action. Well, many people argue that that wasn't the right thing. We should leave it to market forces alone to determine the allocation of resources, supply and demand. No or very little government intervention. But the new economic policy was very radical. There was huge government intervention in order to restructure society. But actually, again, if we really look into the, some school of thoughts, particularly the so-called welfare economics, there's a theorem, the second theorem of welfare economics, which say, yes, free market, the market economy will lead to efficient allocation of resources, and hence it would lead to welfare bliss overall generally. Although some will gain, some will lose, but overall people will be better off under a pure market economy. But it would lead to somehow inequitable outcome. Some people will be really gain, some people will really be worse off. Although overall it is good, but it may lead to that inequity. So in order to address this, the second theorem of welfare economics say you can adjust the initial endowment so that the outcome will be equitable. So initial endowment was just that, the so-called social engineering processes we call new economic policy. The government intervened directly, giving privileges to the underprivileged group, basically the Malays,
in
through
terms of education,
access to education, access to scholarship, access to civil service, and so on. And we can see the outcome now. For example, unlike in the early 70s or unlike in the 60s, now we are seeing Malay doctors, Malay professionals, Malay lecturers, Malay professors in almost all areas, although there are still many shortcomings, many weaknesses, but we have gone very far as compared to the
Tell me about
60s.
the potential alliance, and in the past, the alliances that we heard about with other major Muslim countries, such as Turkey, such as Indonesia, such as at times Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and various other. Have any of those really had any kind of impact? Have they come to fruition? And is there a potential for Malaysia to become part of, whether it be a strategic, a political, or even an economic kind of alliance of that kind of sort?
Yeah, if you were to look at the Muslim countries, OIC, for example, then if you list the top countries in terms of science and technology, then you cannot say that if there is any other country other than Malaysia, Turkey. These two. And then maybe the other Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar. But the rest, maybe Pakistan, but still we have problem in terms of political there and so on. So Malaysia is stable, democratic, and at the same time technologically advanced in a sense. In terms of education as well, higher education, or even primary and secondary and tertiary education. We are in that sense better off than most other Muslim countries. So I think, especially during the time of Prime Minister Mahathir and the present Prime Minister, we are trying to assert that so-called leadership or in the Muslim world. So that's why I think our Prime Minister currently, he made a lot of engagement with the Muslim countries. So Erdogan has been here. The Indonesians are. The Indonesian president even came here twice, I think, already within this period. He came that side rather than we go there. Our Prime Minister went there once, he came there twice. And then I think the Turkish Prime Minister also came here. So, and especially, of course, the issue is that galvanized earth will be Palestine. But at the same time, I think that will kickstart, I think, regeneration of OIC, I hope. Beyond Palestine, we should be talking about more than that. Maybe even especially in science, technology.
I do agree that Malaysia had wanted or had desired maybe to show leadership, global leadership, particularly through what we used to call Malaysia Technical Cooperation Program, MTCP, where we focus on helping so-called Global South countries via that program, South-South kind of development program. And that was in the 90s, but I think we still have it.
We still have it.
Yeah, but to a much lesser extent. The focus was on technical aspect, capacity building, economic development. It's more to technical and economic assistance, much less on other areas, particularly military. We almost do not intervene in that respect. But things have changed a lot, particularly the issues affecting the Palestinians, Gaza in particular. This has created a lot of awareness that perhaps is timely now we relook, our affairs beyond the routines. We need to really consider global humanity issues very seriously. Muslims are, they are being encouraged, they are being indoctrinated to help others, particularly the poor, the needy, through zakat and so on. Let alone, the killings of our brothers and sisters happening in broad daylight, in our naked eyes, and we shouldn't be like before. I think more cooperation will be needed in terms of providing aids, providing the needed help, economic support, particularly on how to start, having a really meaningful ceasefire so that peace would be sustained.
Thank you very much.
I think we are working towards that.
MashaAllah.
Actually, I'm not sure because I want to add about that. We've been talking about external, external challenges, Malaysia and with respect to other countries and so on. But I think internal challenges beyond what Jamal had said in terms of economic disparity, eradication of poverty and so on. I think our main challenge is to maintain that harmony in between the various races and racial and religious communities
within Malaysia.
Within Malaysia, I think that is the biggest, because you see in other countries what happened is that we don't have that in the cohesive forces that actually binds us. Was actually that history. As you said, history is very important. So the historical pact between the various communities, that one, if it is being questioned, then we have a problem. Okay, and then and the issue now, I think one of the challenges that we are facing now is the extremists on either side, both sides of the divide, religious and racial,
of course,
and. I think one of the big challenge, especially when the politician use religion
as a pretext to
basically
their agendas.
Everything is about religion. You do something like this is because of this mosque on the land. Sorry, a temple on the land that belong to a Muslim, and all these things. Then you start to create friction, and so everything is being interpreted as the government of the day is favoring that particular group and having discriminating on certain things and so on. So I think now if Malaysia is to actually there's foreign threat, external threat, I'm not worried. I'm more worried about inside. As I said, like 1969 riots, that was the last one. And from there, the government had realized and tried to, as much as possible, to correct things, and with all the affirmative actions and so on. But now we come to a defining point that if these issues, the friction is not properly managed, we might, have another case like that.